Claressa Shields just got hit with the one sentence her entire camp has been praying would never trend. And it did not come from a rival boxer. It did not come from a journalist. It came from a creator with a loyal following who looked straight into the camera and said Claressa Shields is wrecking her own career with her own two hands. Freeze whatever you are doing right now, because what Geisha 305 said on this livestream is about to turn the whole conversation around Claressa Shields on its head. The slap, the Alicia Baumgardner chaos, the Muhammad Ali comparisons, all of it got dragged into one single verdict. And once you hear the way she closed that live, you will understand exactly why the people around her do not want this clip circulating. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. It is your girl. And if this is your first time pulling up, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button, tap the notification bell, and drop a comment before we even get rolling. Because at the end of this video, I am going to ask you two questions that are about to split this entire comment section down the middle. Like, share, and subscribe right now, because this one is heavy. Now, if you have not been keeping up with this situation, let me get you caught up real quick, because the backstory matters here. Claressa Shields, two-time Olympic gold medalist, multiple division undisputed champion, the woman who calls herself the greatest woman of all time, allegedly slapped Alicia Baumgardner at a public event, in front of a crowd so packed and so chaotic that to this day nobody can even agree on where the slap actually landed. Think about that for a second. We are not talking about sparring footage. We are not talking about heated words at a press conference. We are talking about one of the most decorated fighters on the planet allegedly putting hands on another champion at a public function, with cameras everywhere and witnesses everywhere, and the story still came out muddy. And ever since that moment, the debate around her has not been about her jab, her footwork, or her resume. It has been about her conduct, her temperament, her judgment outside the ropes. And that is the exact arena Geisha 305 stepped into when she went live. Now, for anybody who does not know, Geisha 305 has been one of the most consistent critics of Claressa Shields on this platform. Not a drive-by hater, not a one-video wonder, but somebody who has built an entire audience around breaking down the champion's behavior, her mannerisms, and her record. And on this particular live, she did not come with jokes. She did not come with memes. She came with the most surgical, specific, point-by-point verdict anybody has delivered on her since this whole Alicia Baumgardner situation exploded. And I am going to walk you through every single piece of it, clip by clip, claim by claim, because the way she built this argument is honestly a masterclass in how to corner somebody with nothing but their own pattern of behavior. But before we get into the first clip, I need you to understand the temperature of the room Geisha was speaking into. Because Claressa Shields does not take criticism quietly. She has a documented history of responding to critics, not with statements, not with silence, but with personal, emotional, sometimes physical escalation. So when a critic with a real following decides to speak on her, that is not a small thing. That is a risk. And Geisha 305 opened her live by addressing that risk head-on, in a way that immediately told her audience this was not going to be gossip. This was going to be an indictment. And baby, when I tell you she structured this thing like a closing argument in a courtroom, I am not exaggerating. She opened with her own credentials as a critic. She established her evidence. She anticipated every counterargument before Claressa Shields' defenders could even type it. And then she landed a final line so cold, so calm, and so final that the live chat went silent. We are going to get to that final line. Trust me, you want to stay for that final line. But we have to build to it the same way she did, because context is everything here. So Geisha 305 starts the live by laying her cards on the table, and I want you to hear how precise this framing is. She says, essentially, everything I have ever said about you has been about your mannerisms, your conduct, and your skills as a boxer. She reminds her audience that she has questioned whether unanimous decisions with only 3 knockouts justify calling yourself the heavyweight queen of the world. And then she says the part that reframes this entire feud. She says, these are my opinions. This is what I feel. And the moment I built a following of people who agreed with my point of view, you put out into the universe that you hate me. Now stop right there, because that is the first brick in the wall, and it is heavier than it sounds. What Geisha 305 just did was separate two things that Claressa Shields' camp loves to blur together. Criticism of the work is not hatred of the person. Disagreeing with a fighter's resume is not a personal attack. Geisha is telling her audience, I never came for this woman as a human being. I came for the public behavior of a public figure, which is literally the job of commentary. And the response she got back was not a counterargument. It was not a correction. It was Claressa Shields announcing that she hates her. A woman Claressa Shields has never met. A woman Claressa Shields does not know personally. Geisha said it plainly. That is problematic. For somebody to feel that kind of personal hatred toward a stranger whose only crime was having an opinion that resonated with people. And here is where it gets even more layered, because Geisha 305 did not hide her own hand in this feud. She admitted, openly, on that live, that she spoke with Claressa Shields' cousin. She admitted she got in Tasha K's ear to make an interview happen. She did not pretend to be some neutral observer floating above the drama. She told her audience exactly how she moves, and then she drew the line that the whole argument rests on. She said, "This is how I handle my platform. Your arena is that boxing ring. My arena is this platform. And what I choose to give the people who follow me. Y'all, that right there is a thesis statement. Because what she is really saying is, we both have stages, and we are both responsible for what we do on them. Nobody gets to hide behind their platform when the behavior turns ugly." She even acknowledged that some of her own followers ride for Claressa Shields. She said she has people following her who defend Claressa Shields, and she does not mind that. She welcomes the agree to disagree conversations. Think about the contrast being drawn here, because it is deliberate. On one side you have a critic saying, I can sit with people who disagree with me, I can defend my position, I can admit my own moves. On the other side you have a champion whose documented response to a stranger's opinion was a declaration of hate. One of those people is behaving like an adult with a platform. The other one is behaving like the platform owes her worship. And Geisha 305 made sure her audience saw that contrast without her ever having to say the quiet part out loud. She just stacked the facts side by side and let the audience draw the verdict themselves. That is why this live hit so different. It was not rage. It was architecture. Every clip, every admission, every pause was placed exactly where it needed to be to make the next point unavoidable. And the next point is the one that set the internet on fire. And one more thing about the arena argument before we move on, because this is the piece of the live that most of the clips cut out, and it might be the most important part of the whole foundation. When Geisha said her platform is her arena and the ring is Claressa's, she was not just making a catchy comparison. She was establishing a standard of accountability that applies equally to both of them. A fighter answers for what she does in her arena. A commentator answers for what she does in hers. And by laying her own moves on the table first, the cousin conversation, the Tasha K interview, the criticism campaign, Geisha did something that almost nobody in this space ever does. She made herself auditable before she audited anybody else. That move matters more than any insult could, because it strips the whataboutism out of the response before the response can even form. You cannot cry, but you did this at somebody who already told you they did it, why they did it, and what rules they play by. The only thing left to argue after that is the argument itself. And as we are about to see, the argument itself is where this live becomes untouchable. Because after establishing that her criticism has always been about conduct, Geisha 305 looked into that camera and said the sentence that is now clipped, reposted, and stitched across every platform. Claressa Shields is not an athlete you want your daughters growing up trying to be like. She is not a role model. Let that breathe for a second. We are talking about a two-time Olympic gold medalist. A woman who came out of Flint, Michigan, and conquered amateur boxing and professional boxing at the same time. By every athletic measure, Claressa Shields should be the automatic answer when a little girl asks who to look up to. The medals are real. The belts are real. The history is real. And yet here is a grown woman with a platform saying, no, not this one, not for your daughters. And the reason it landed so hard is that she did not say it as an insult. She said it as a conclusion. There is a difference between calling somebody a name and reading somebody their own pattern back to them. And Geisha 305 did the second one. She pointed straight at the Alicia Baumgardner incident and said, what happened at that public event was not leading by example. And she is right that nobody should ever have to say this about an athlete with that resume. But here we are. And of course, the moment this clip started moving, the defenses came out, and Geisha already knew what they would be, because they are always the same. The first defense is the double standard argument. When the men talk trash, nobody has a problem, but when the women do it, everybody has a problem. And Geisha shut that down immediately. She said, stop throwing gender into it, because this has nothing to do with gender. And honestly, she is making a point that a lot of people are scared to make out loud. The criticism here is not criticism of women being confident. It is criticism of specific behavior, an alleged public slap on Alicia Baumgardner, the relentless personal feuds, the online wars that have nothing to do with boxing. Confidence did not put hands on anybody at a public event. So hiding behind the gender card every time the conduct gets questioned is not a defense. It is a deflection, and Geisha called it exactly that. But the second defense is the one she really came to destroy, because it is the one Claressa Shields supporters reach for first, last, and always. The Muhammad Ali comparison. You have heard it 100 times. Muhammad Ali talked trash. Muhammad Ali was brash. Muhammad Ali was hated in his time too. So history will vindicate her the same way. And Geisha 305 did not just disagree with that comparison. She took it apart piece by piece in real time. And what she did to it was so thorough that I need to give it its own section, because this was the emotional core of the entire live. She said, you can never compare Muhammad Ali to Claressa Shields. And then she spent the next several minutes proving it with a level of historical detail that most of the people making that comparison have clearly never bothered to learn. And baby, when she finished, there was nothing left of that comparison but smoke. Stay right here, because this next part is where the whole live turns from commentary into something closer to a lesson. And it is the part Claressa Shields' defenders have no answer for. Not one. I have read through hundreds of comments on this clip, and not a single person has been able to rebuild the Ali comparison after what she said. See if you can do it in the comments, because I do not think it can be done. So here is how Geisha 305 dismantled the Muhammad Ali comparison, and I want you to notice that she never once raised her voice while doing it. She started with the substance of what Ali's trash talk actually was. She said, when Muhammad Ali talked, he talked about the right things. Yes, he talked about fighting inside the ring, the predictions, the poems, the bravado. But his platform was never just about himself. Muhammad Ali used that microphone to fight for his people as a culture. He was not just a fighter who talked. He was a voice. And then she brought the receipts, because this is the part the comparison makers always skip. Muhammad Ali did not just risk backlash for his beliefs. He lost everything for them. He refused induction into the United States Army during the Vietnam War, called it a war he wanted no part of, said his battle was not overseas against people who had never wronged him. His fight was at home, for his own people. And for that stance, he was convicted. He was stripped of his heavyweight title. He was banned from boxing during the prime physical years of his career, facing prison time, with every institution in the country lined up against him. He sacrificed the belts, the money, the prime, all of it, because he would not go fight what he called a war that was not his. That is the weight behind the name Muhammad Ali. That is what people are reaching for when they say the word Ali. And here is the distinction Geisha drew that I need everybody to sit with. She said, Muhammad Ali did not only represent how pretty he was, how cocky he was, how confident he was. He talked about the love and the unity of his brothers and his sisters. The only place Muhammad Ali broke another human being down was inside that ring. Outside of it, his mouth was a building tool, not a wrecking ball. When he spoke against something, it was against the systems pressing on his people, never against his own. That is the part that makes the comparison collapse. Claressa Shields' public energy does not build. It feuds. It escalates. It allegedly slaps Alicia Baumgardner at public events. It declares hatred for critics it has never met. There is no unity message attached to it. There is no cause bigger than the ego attached to it. And Geisha said it in the plainest terms possible. The spokesperson Muhammad Ali existed to build us up, not tear us down. Then she landed the line that has been echoing across the internet ever since. You cannot compete where you do not compare. Baby, that sentence. You cannot compete where you do not compare. It sounds simple, but it reframed the entire debate in 7 words. Because the Ali comparison was never really about Ali. It was a shield, no pun intended, a way to borrow greatness by association. And Geisha 305 took that borrowed greatness off the table and left the behavior standing there by itself, with nothing to hide behind. She said it directly, Muhammad Ali was a role model. Claressa Shields is not. And then she added the line that I think is the most quotable thing said in this entire situation. That is not a diss. That is a distinction. A diss is an attack. A distinction is a measurement. And measurements can be argued with, but they cannot be waved away. I want you to remember that framing, because it comes back at the end of this story, and when it comes back, it hits twice as hard. And understand something about why that particular dismantling mattered so much in this moment. The Ollie comparison is not just a debate tactic. It is the load-bearing wall of the entire pro-Shields argument online. Take it away, and every defense of the last year of behavior has to stand on its own 2 feet, and Geisha knew that. That is why she spent the most minutes on it. She did not rush through the history. She slowed down. She stacked fact on fact, and she made her audience sit inside the difference between trash talk that serves a people and trash talk that serves a brand. One of those things echoes for 50 years. The other one echoes until the next news cycle. And the audience felt the difference, because the chat reaction in that moment shifted from joking to dead serious. You could watch people realizing in real time that they had been repeating a comparison they had never actually examined. That is the most dangerous thing a commentator can do to a narrative, not attack it, but make people examine it for the first time. Now, after the Ollie section, Geisha 305 pivoted to something most commentators are too scared to touch: the people around Claressa Shields. The hype machine. And she did not spare them. She said, "It is okay to be cocky, but you are not invincible." Claressa Shields has no principles, and she is being hyped up by a bunch of nobodies. Now I know that sounds harsh, but listen to the argument underneath the heat, because there is one. Her point was not that fans are worthless people. Her point was about the quality of the counsel surrounding Claressa Shields. She described the loudest voices in Claressa's corner as big-mouth men who root her on in her hypocrisy, her drama-filled energy, her chaotic behavior. People, she said, who could not get in a ring and take anybody down themselves, cheering hardest for the person who wants to fight everybody. And then she aimed directly at a very specific type of internet commenter, the kind who jumps in every comment section talking about who Claressa Shields could beat up. Geisha's question to them was brutal in its simplicity. Who can you beat up, sir? Because, she said, most of the ones coming for women online are men who cannot fight men. Phew. Now, whether you agree with every word of that or not, you have to acknowledge the underlying observation, because it is real. There is a whole economy around Claressa Shields right now that profits off her chaos. The channels that farm her feuds. The pages that clip her angriest moments. The commenters who treat her like an action figure they can wind up and point at whoever they dislike. None of those people pay a price when her reputation takes a hit. She pays it. They get the content. She gets the consequences. And a real support system. The kind that actually loves you. Tells you when to put the phone down, when to walk away from the camera, when an opponent like Alicia Baumgartner is not worth a public incident. A hype machine does the opposite. It hands you the matches and cheers for the fire. And that is the ecosystem Geisha 305 was describing. An athlete with genuine, historic, once-in-a-generation talent, surrounded by voices that reward her worst instincts and call it loyalty. And notice what this does to the whole narrative. Up until now, the story of the champion versus her critics has been framed as a fighter against the world, the champ on one side, the haters on the other. But what Geisha 305 did on this live was redraw that map entirely. In her framing, the real opposition is not outside the camp. It is not the critics, not the internet, not Alicia Baumgartner, not Geisha herself. The real threat to Claressa Shields is operating inside her own decision-making, and it is being fed daily by people who will never share in the fallout. And that reframing is exactly what set up the single most devastating line of the entire live. The line her whole team does not want trending, the one I told you about at the top of this video. And here it comes. Now let me zoom out for a second and talk about the Alicia Baumgartner situation itself, because everything Geisha 305 said on this live traces back to that single moment, and I do not think people fully appreciate how strange that moment was. A public event. A crowd so dense that witnesses could not even agree on the details. And in the middle of all of it, an alleged slap. Champion on champion, outside the ring, with no gloves, no referee, no bell. Whatever you believe about who initiated what, the image that survives is the same image. One of the faces of women's boxing involved in a physical altercation at a public function. And that image now sits on her legacy next to the gold medals, whether anybody likes it or not. Legacies are not edited. They accumulate. Every incident is a deposit, and this one was a heavy withdrawal. And here is the part that connects directly to what Geisha said about the critic dynamic. Alicia Baumgartner said what she said about the situation, and for saying it, she allegedly got slapped at a public event. Geisha 305 built a following with her opinions, and for building it, she got told she was hated. Do you see the pattern running underneath both stories? The offense is never what Claressa did. The offense is always what somebody said about what she did. The reaction never targets the argument. It targets the audience. When the critic is small, she ignores them. When the critic grows, when the opinion starts resonating with thousands of people, that is when the hatred gets declared. And Geisha named that pattern out loud. Hating someone you have never met because their opinion resonated with people is not a response to criticism. It is a confirmation of it. Read that again, because that is the engine of this whole story. An argument can be answered. A resonance can only be punished. And when you cannot answer the argument, punishing the resonance is the only move left. Now, I have been doing this long enough to know how the comment section is about to split. So let me address both camps before we even get there. To the people who ride for her no matter what, I hear you, and some of your points are legitimate. She has been disrespected by the business side of the sport for years. She has headlined cards and still had to fight for her purse. Nobody on this channel is denying the resume or the struggle. But none of that answers the question Geisha put on the table, and the question is not about boxing. The question is whether conduct outside the ring gets to be discussed at all, or whether the medals work as a permanent gag order on everybody watching. And to the people who cannot stand her, be honest with yourselves too. There is a difference between holding a public figure accountable and just enjoying the pile-on. And if your criticism of her would look different coming from a place of respect, then it is not criticism, it is entertainment. Geisha 305 managed to stay on the right side of that line for most of this live, and that is exactly why her words are sticking. It is very hard to dismiss a critic who admits her own moves, welcomes disagreement, and ends with a condition instead of an insult. Geisha 305 looked at the camera and said, Claressa Shields needs to learn humility because she is damaging her own career. It is not the people voicing their opinions about her who are doing the damage. She is sabotaging her own career. She is doing it herself, all by herself, by playing all across the board, doing unnecessary things that have nothing to do with boxing, saying despicable things out of her own mouth, and then always playing the victim. And then Geisha said the two sentences that turned this whole live from commentary into a verdict. She said, she is always the victim, and she is not a victim. She is a bully, all by her lonesome. That is the phrase that is going to follow Claressa Shields around, and I will tell you why. Every other criticism of Claressa Shields can be absorbed by the usual defenses. If a critic attacks her skills, you point to the medals. If a critic attacks her record, you point to the undisputed titles. If the internet piles on, you cry bias, you cry sexism, you rally the base. Those defenses work because they relocate the fight to territory where Claressa Shields is strong. But self-sabotage cannot be defended that way. There is no opponent to blame. There is no referee to complain about. There is no biased judge on the scorecards. If the damage is self-inflicted, then every defensive wall her camp has built becomes irrelevant, because the threat is already inside the walls. That is why her team does not want this framing trending. It is the one attack angle that all her armor is useless against. And then there is the bully versus victim framing, which Geisha handled with a piece of logic that I have not seen anybody successfully argue against since this clip dropped. She said, those two things cannot occupy the same person at the same time. You are either the victim of what people are doing to you, or you are the bully doing it to others. Think about how cleanly that cuts. Because the public persona of Claressa Shields asks you to hold both ideas simultaneously, that she is the fearsome champion who will fight anybody, anywhere, who slapped Alicia Baumgartner at a public event, who declares hatred for strangers, and also that she is the perpetual victim of unfair attacks, of critics, of the media, of other fighters ducking her. Geisha's point is that you have to pick one. And when you lay the evidence of the last year end to end, the feuds, the alleged slap, the public wars with people who have never thrown a punch in their lives, she says the evidence picks for you. Now, I want to be fair here for a moment. Because this channel does not just repeat verdicts, we examine them. Is there pressure on Claressa Shields that most of us will never understand? Absolutely. She came from nothing. She fought for respect in a sport that barely pays its women and barely promotes them. The level of criticism she faces would genuinely test anybody's composure. And some of what gets said about her online is ugly and personal and has nothing to do with the sport. All of that is true. But here is the counterweight. And it is the same counterweight Geisha 305 kept returning to. Pressure explains behavior. It does not excuse it. Muhammad Ali faced pressure Claressa Shields will never know. The government, the establishment, the loss of his livelihood. And his response was to build. That is the standard her own supporters invited into the conversation when they made the Ali comparison. You do not get to borrow the man's legacy and then decline the man's discipline. And as we head into the final part of this live, keep that tension in your mind, because the way Geisha closed this thing made all of it. The slap, the Ali talk, the hype machine, the self-sabotage, snap into one final, chilling sentence. And let me say one more thing about the reaction to this live, because the response online has been its own story. Within hours of this clip circulating, you could watch the narrative battlefield form in real time. On one side, thousands of people co-signing every word. Not just casual fans, but boxing people, people who have watched her career from the Flint days, saying some version of the same thing. We have been waiting for somebody to say this calmly, without screaming, without hating, just laying the pattern out end to end. On the other side, the defense force mobilized exactly the way Geisha predicted they would, not by answering the self-sabotage point, not by rebuilding the Ali comparison, but by attacking Geisha herself. Her appearance, her platform, her motives, her right to speak at all. And I need you to notice what that response proves, because it proves the very thing the live was about. When the argument cannot be beaten, the arguer becomes the target. That is not a defense of the champion. That is the pattern demonstrating itself in front of everybody, within hours of the pattern being described. And this is why I keep telling y'all that this story is bigger than one live stream. What we are watching is a referendum on how a generational athlete handles the one opponent no champion can knock out, public opinion. Every great fighter in history had to figure out that fight. Some figured it out and became legends twice over. Some never did, and watched the public turn their greatness into a cautionary tale. The belts cannot win this one. The knockouts cannot win this one. Only the behavior can. And that is the whole point of the verdict that is now trending. The fight she needs to win first is not against Alicia Baumgardner, not against Geisha 305, not against the internet. It is against the version of herself that keeps handing her critics their next clip. So we arrive at the close of the live. And this is the part that genuinely gave me chills because of how it was delivered. Geisha 305 had spent all that time building the opinions versus hatred framing, the platform versus ring argument, the role model verdict, the demolition of the Muhammad Ali comparison, the anatomy of the hype machine, the self-sabotage indictment. And a lesser commentator would have ended all of that with screaming, with insults, with a victory lap. That is not what she did. She got quiet. She said, "If Alicia Baumgardner wants that fight, I am wishing her the best." And then she delivered the final verdict, calm as a judge reading a sentence. Claressa Shields does not deserve a fight until she learns how to control her mannerisms and her behavior. And I am out, y'all. And then she left. No dramatic exit. No mic drop theatrics. No shouting. Just done. And baby, that restraint is exactly what made it devastating. Understand what she actually said there, because it is bigger than it sounds. She did not say Claressa Shields cannot fight. She did not say Claressa Shields should not fight. She said Claressa Shields does not deserve the fight. She turned the Alicia Baumgardner matchup, the biggest money fight available in women's boxing, the fight she has been chasing, into something that has to be earned through conduct. She made self-control the price of admission. That is not an insult. That is a condition. And conditions are so much harder to fight than insults, because an insult you can punch back at, but a condition just sits there, patient, unmoved, waiting for you to either meet it or prove it right. And let me tell you why the phrase, "and I am out," y'all, landed harder than everything that came before it. Because finality is the rarest thing on the internet. Everybody online is performing outrage for engagement. The fake fury, the endless beefs that never resolve because resolution does not pay. But when somebody lays out an entire case, delivers a verdict, and then genuinely, calmly exits the conversation, it signals something the audience can feel in their bones. This person was not performing. She was not farming the feud. She said everything she believed was worth saying, and then she stopped talking. There is nothing left to argue with when somebody is already gone. You cannot ratio a closed door. And that calmness after that verdict is honestly the most devastating possible way to end a conversation about another person. Not with anger, but with finality. So let me put the whole architecture together for you, because when you see the full sequence laid out, you understand why this live hit like a freight train. A champion allegedly slapped Alicia Baumgardner at a public event. A critic built a following with her opinions and was told she was hated for it. The Muhammad Ali defense was dismantled with history instead of emotion. You cannot compete where you do not compare. The hype machine got exposed as people who profit from chaos they will never pay for. The damage got relocated from the critics to the champion herself, self-sabotage, all by her lonesome. The victim narrative got collapsed into a single either-or, victim or bully, not both. And then the whole thing got sealed with a condition and a calm goodbye. Every single element fed the next one. That is not a rant. That is a closing argument, and Claressa Shields' team knows it, which is exactly why they do not want this clip moving. But now I want to hear from y'all, because this is where you come in, and I am asking you for real, not just for engagement. 2 questions, and I need your honest answers in the comments. Question 1. Geisha 305 said Claressa Shields is sabotaging her own career and that the critics are not doing the damage. She is doing it to herself. After everything we have watched this year, the alleged slap on Alicia Baumgardner, the feuds, the declarations of hatred for critics, do you think that verdict is accurate? Or do you think the level of criticism Claressa Shields faces would break anybody's composure? And we are watching the predictable result of a person under constant attack? There is a real debate here, and I do not want the lazy answers. I want you to think about where responsibility actually lives. Question 2. You cannot compete where you do not compare. Do you think the Muhammad Ali comparison people keep attaching to Claressa Shields was ever fair in the first place? Or is it possible to honor what Claressa Shields has actually accomplished? The 2 Olympic gold medals, the undisputed titles, the barriers broken for women in the sport, without borrowing a legacy that belongs to a man who lost everything for his principles? Can Claressa Shields be great on her own terms, without the Ali Shield? Tell me what you think, and tell me why. Now, before you go, let me tell you what is coming next on this channel, because this story is not over, not even close. There is a response brewing from Claressa Shields' side, because if there is one thing we know about her, it is that she does not let a verdict like this sit unanswered. And when that response drops, we are going to break it down line by line, the same way we did today. There is also the Alicia Baumgardner question hanging over all of this. Does she get her fight? Does the condition Geisha set actually matter to the people who sign the contracts? And what happens to the biggest matchup on the table if conduct becomes part of the negotiation? We are covering all of it, and you are not going to want to miss a single upload. So if you made it this far, do me 3 favors. Hit that like button so the algorithm knows this conversation matters. Subscribe and tap the bell so you are here the moment the next chapter drops. And share this video with one person who has been making the Muhammad Ali argument without knowing the history. Send it to them and watch what happens. And if you are still here and you have not commented yet, just drop the words compete or compare down below and let me know which side you are on. Remember what we said today. A diss is an attack, but a distinction is a measurement. And measurements do not disappear just because they make people uncomfortable. Until she controls herself, she does not deserve the platform. That was the verdict. It was not shouted. It was not performed. It was delivered calmly, completely, and then the person who delivered it walked away. And somehow that quiet exit said more than every screamed hot take on this platform combined. I am your girl Stella. This has been Tea with Stella, honey, and I will see you on the next one. Stay ready, because this story is going to get a whole lot louder before it gets quieter. Peace.